This is The Baseline, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA.
Welcome, everybody. You're tuned to The Baseline. Callie Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. And we continue our coveted series, FaceTime with The Baseline. We've got another great guest lined up to really break things down and bring us to the forefront of interesting conversations. And we always love doing that, man. And what more can be said, man? It's always great to break bread with unique and really coveted individuals. And I'm always happy to be able to do it with my right-hand man, www.shawsports.net. Big Kahuna PNC, my brother from another mother, Mr. Warren Shaw, repping out of Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Good afternoon, good day, good evening, sir. We are live and direct with another great conversation to be had.
Yeah, man, you know how we do. We make sure that we bring the butter goods, as you like to say, as always, my dude. And I'm excited about this week's guest on FaceTime with the Baseline. You know, for us, we are people first, obviously, and this guest talks a little bit about the human spirit and what she's doing with athletes to make sure that their voices are heard on a different platform than they're ordinarily discussed on.
Absolutely. And if for those who are itching to find out who it is that we'll be sitting down to have conversations with, she is the co-founder, chief strategy officer of Athletes Voices. Joanne Pasternack will be on board with us in a few moments to really break down this initiative, the partnership with Harvard University, and how she is making an impact, not just through the institutions that she is with, also with Oliver Rose, she is the president and chief impact officer for her firm, but also with the partnership she has built with so many coveted athletes who are out there trying to make changes, not just socially, but also personally in every single way and shape and form. And we're just really happy to be able to bring this to you guys. So please sit tight, kick back, relax, and be blown away by this awesome individual who we will have on in a few moments. As always, we got to make sure we do our proper plugs. Be sure to get at my man Shaw at Shaw Sports NBA, or get at me at Game Face Lee, the show's Twitter handle at NBA Baseline, available on all the major platforms. Whichever platform you use to listen to our show, please, by all means, have us on there at the top of your list. And if you're our new listener, be sure to look for the Baseline NBA podcast. Add us to your playlist. Allow us to be your go-to resource discussing all things happening in the association. Also, for our Dash listeners, be sure to check out the Baseline NBA show every Tuesday, 1 p.m. And if you missed us on Tuesday, well, we roll right back up on Wednesday as well, too. As always, man, we appreciate our peoples from the Nothing But Net Radio Network, providing us the platform to continue to roll out great content each and every single week. And for our listeners as well, if you need a home to listen to all of our previous episodes, be sure to check us out at www.thebaselinenba.com. Let's not waste any time. Let's get right into it. You know how we do. You know how we roll. Let's do a little FaceTime with the Baseline. Time to do a little FaceTime with the Baseline, and we have really a remarkable guest on board with us to talk about a platform that is just absolutely sweeping minds and hearts alike. And for people who really understand the nuances and what goes on with, you know, being an athlete and having to balance your personal life with what you do, even in sports itself. It's so hard to be able to have advocates and people in place to continue to push your voice and your platform forward. But there's someone here who's been working tirelessly for decades as far as having a vision and being philanthropic with what athletes need to feel and say, not just on their personal lives, but even in the greatest of platforms, and even during these remarkable times. She is the president and chief impact officer of Oliver Rose LLC, but you can also find her and her team working on really one of the more phenomenal projects going on right now, Athletes Voices. Joanne Pasternack is with us here. Joanne, thanks for hopping on board with us.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate the compliment of my decades of experience. I like to think of myself as 25, but with more and more wrinkles coming on during COVID here, I'm going to say that I can't really pass for that anymore. But I'm excited to be here, excited to talk to you guys today.
So one of the things that has really been inspirational in reading not just your biography, but also the work that you've been doing is how you continue to push the needle, how you continue to move the ball forward, I guess is the best way to put it. And we definitely want you to first talk to us about Athletes' Voices. It's a partnership with the Harvard University as a comprehensive educational enterprise tool, but there is so much more to it, and we're really excited to hear, what that means, not just to you, but what it should mean to us, not just listeners, and also athletes and people abroad who really don't understand that space of why it's important for athletes to have a voice.
Sure. Athletes' Voices came about based on a hypothesis that if we felt as athletes, as advocates, as people with voices and a desire to share those voices, if we were given a better framework to learn and develop and grow within our confidence of how to use our voices, that we could be more impactful. It's built off of, as you said, decades worth of experience, but working directly with individuals who knew exactly what they wanted to say and know exactly what they're feeling inside, but often are hesitant to speak up or speak out because they're concerned about how it might be received. And one of the things that I have seen over my career is with the advent of social media and the need for an answer right now, you end up as a professional athlete who is in the spotlight feeling like you need to give an answer right now, even when it may not be based on the baseline of knowledge that you would want to have in front of you as you're responding. So Athletes' Voices came about as a partnership between Harvard University's Weatherhead initiative on global history, because we are looking at the historical context for how athletes have been influencers on issues around social justice for hundreds of years, truly. We're using that as our guidepost to showcase what's going on today and in today's world, as we've seen athletes across all disciplines really standing up for what they believe in and using their voices to create momentum around change, but partnering up with some of the greatest leaders in the business world as well to amplify those voices and to support them. And it's been an exciting journey so far. We are 2 webcasts into a year-long series where we'll be addressing different topics, but we will culminate in June of 2021 with a 3-day certificate program for athletes who are emerging within their area as a philanthropist and as an advocate, to be able to immerse them in this knowledge and to learn from some of the greatest athlete advocates, academics, and professionals in the world.
So Joanne, as you alluded to, your breadth of knowledge and just embedding it in the space of philanthropy and community involvement, so to speak, was it easy to form this now, especially with the way things are going? Was this kind of a no-brainer? And then when you asked and reached out to your colleagues and your network to say, hey, here's what we want to do, did everyone just kind of come clamoring and running in the door?
Wow. We started this project 3 years ago. I was part of a convening of about 250 people. This sounds kind of crazy, but it was at the Vatican with the Pope. And they brought together leaders in the world of sports philanthropy, people who truly believed that sports have the power to make a change in the world and to bring humanity together. And it was an incredible initiative. It was funny for me in a couple of ways. I flew on a red eye out to Rome after the breast cancer awareness game at the San Francisco 49ers. At the time, I was the vice president of philanthropy and the head of the 49ers Foundation, and left the game at halftime, got on a plane. I'm of the Jewish faith, and it was Yom Kippur. I fasted while I was flying to go meet with the Pope. We got there. This is in the season when Colin Kaepernick was first taking a knee at games, and everybody was starting to take notice. And over a glass of wine and some amazing pizza, after our day of sessions of learning and really being immersed in this incredible environment, we were outside the gates of the Vatican. We started talking about what was going on and how athletes were being treated in this environment. And I had this revelation, and this is probably because my mother is a librarian and my sister is a librarian, and I'm quite nerdy when it comes to word games and all of that. But I played a lot of Mad Libs growing up, and I don't know if you've ever played that, but it's a game where you have no context, but you're asked to insert a proper noun, a verb, an adjective into a scenario, but you don't know what the storyline is. And then your little brother, big brother, sister will read it back to you, and it's absolutely ridiculous. When you're a 10-year-old boy, you're usually putting in, words like poop or whatever. When you're a girl, maybe you're doing something different. But it struck me that the way we were approaching athlete engagement in philanthropy and in social impact related causes was essentially saying any proper noun will do. Any athlete can be substituted for any other athlete. And that's just false. We all have our own story. We all have our own origin, and we all have a cause that's closest to our heart. So that started us on this journey. And originally, we had actually intended to have the certificate program launch in June of 2020, but COVID happened. And we were sitting there in March and originally looking and saying, well, we're going to have to pivot, we're going to have to change. And then the world just started to move together in a direction like unlike anything I'd seen ever before. And I'm originally from Washington, D.C., and my dad was in government when I was a baby. I mean, I've been around so many amazing moments in my life, but I mean, we stopped, we took a deep breath, and we said, it has to happen somehow, some way. And that's when we started making the calls. The first person who said yes was one of the greatest humans I've had the opportunity to work with, and that's Coach Kerr. And Coach Kerr, I mean, honestly, barely hesitated. This is a man who could not have a busier plate. But when he heard that this was not about yet another cause that would amplify the voice of a super mega star, like the entire roster of the Golden State Warriors, but would allow those athletes to essentially pass the torch to the next generation of advocates, he said yes, and he opened up about his own story. And from there, it just continued to gain momentum. And within, I'd say, about 3 weeks of deciding we were going to move in a direction where we'd have a year of webinars and really building momentum towards the convening, we had the athlete advisory group set. We're still adding to it with some additional voices coming to the table. And we had our business executives set as well. And we have representation from some of the greatest business names as well. The CEO of Gibson Guitar, executive producer from Pixar. We have the Walton Family Foundation and Instagram, Facebook, and everything in between, BlackRock. And the reason why we brought this group together was because we believe that working together, we can tell a story from so many different perspectives. So it's Pixar. I don't think there's a better organization on earth that can animate and make you cry and laugh and feel and think, and reach an audience of 2-year-olds as much as they can reach an audience of 92-year-olds. And you think about Gibson Guitar and how they are really the soundtrack. But at the same time, BlackRock is thinking through how to make an investment and make it last, and to think about social impact investment as well. So that all came together. And I don't know, you think about these moments when you're stuck and you don't know where to go. And this is the exact opposite for me and for my colleagues working on this. I jump out of bed at 6 a.m. excited to dive into whatever it is that we have next on the agenda for Athletes' Voices, because I'm so excited about it.
Co-founder, Chief Strategy Officer, Officer for Athletes' Voices, Joanne Pasternack, joining us here, FaceTime with the Baseline. Be sure to check out the website, athletesvoices.org. Joanne, there's so much to unpack. I had to make sure I hit my man Shaw up before, because I know he loves chomping at the bit with the follow-up question after the follow-up question. But I want to really quick highlight something that you had just talked about, which I find very remarkable, is the fact that when you say you get up at 6 a.m. and that there is like, you're eager and you are enthusiastic, thinking about ways to continue not just this, what I feel is a movement, but also really a reckoning and an understanding. And this is like the time and the place for athletes to feel like they can be made, they can be made whole in what they're doing as having a voice to and be validated in what's going on. I think back to where we've been over the last, maybe 5. I think about, the Players Tribune. There's a plethora of platforms where it seems like the focus is saying athletes' voices need to be taken seriously and not be used as entertainment. Is that the kind of conversations that you and your team have when you're speaking to the likes of Paul Gasol and Steve Kerr, in that they understand that when they are now speaking, that the platform is taking their voice as serious as they believe in their message and what they're trying to disseminate to the masses?
Yes, and I'll further that by saying I want voices to be heard as they originate. My dad grew up in Brooklyn. He grew up in Brownsville. Yeah, exactly. And you know what? I joke sometimes that, my name is Joanne, but my family in Brooklyn, it's got a long A, it's a Joanne, but
where do you get the wine and pizza from? I mean,
yeah,
that's
exactly. I know,
that's a Brooklyn.
Well, you got to fold it in half and,
Exactly.
eat it for real. But I can't pick up a newspaper without folding it a few times, but it's but it's when you feel like you need to change who you are and what your voice sounds like in order to fit in somewhere, that takes the authenticity of your voice away. And I saw that. I saw that in my dad. I also saw that in the other astounding leader I had an opportunity to learn from very early in my career. I was with Special Olympics at their global headquarters in Washington, D.C., right out of law school. I had the great opportunity to work there when Eunice Kennedy Shriver and Sergeant Shriver were still alive and very involved in the organization. And I was 26 years old. And you know how there's like the table in the middle where people are sitting, and then there's the seats around the table. And there's the people, then there are the people who don't even get to sit in the seats around the table. Like that was me. I was the person like standing by the seats. But Mrs. Shriver put a call out around a program we were launching for healthy athletes. And she said, it was almost like an open call for ideas. And I raised my hand and I had an idea. And the words that she said at that moment were really empowering to me. She said, let's see if we can find a way to make that happen. And I loved the way that she phrased it. She wasn't promising anything, but she was promising to explore it. Move forward a couple of weeks later, and there was some legislation that was coming before Congress that would have limited access for healthcare to individuals with intellectual disabilities. A woman I worked with at Special Olympics, who's now the Chief Inspiration Officer for the global movement, Loretta Claiborne, who is just, if you haven't seen the movie about her life, produced by Disney, I highly, highly recommend it. But Tim Shriver, who is the president and CEO of Special Olympics, was going to be speaking before Congress about this access to healthcare. And Loretta, as only Loretta could say, very wisely said, why would I need you to speak for me when I can speak for myself? And Tim, being one of the warmest, most wonderful people, he laughed. And I mean, I can picture the entire thing in my head still. And this is 20 plus years ago. He laughed and he said, you're absolutely right, Loretta. You should be speaking for yourself. Use your own authentic voice. It doesn't matter what your IQ is. It doesn't matter what your acuity for the English language is. I have personally believed very strongly in there is a huge difference between being smart and being educated. And so few of us have the opportunity to be both smart and educated, that if you're holding somebody back because the words they're using don't quite fit the scenario, or their grammar might be different, or quite frankly, I don't care if you want to curse to get your words across. It's what's most comfortable to you that matters. And when you're trying to isolate the words or to, and maybe this is again the librarian in me, but if you're censoring what you're saying in order to fit the general audience, then you're probably not getting your true feelings out. And that's what Athletes' Voices is about. It's cause agnostic. It's politically agnostic. We're not telling you what to believe in. We're not telling you who to believe. We're not telling you who to vote for. I mean, clearly there's a leaning there, but we're not prescriptive about that. We're saying we're going to help you go through a journey to figure out what matters most to you, and whatever that is. It could be the prevalency of diabetes in Camden, New Jersey, or it could be the Black Lives Matter movement. I really don't care. let's just help you to figure out how to best create momentum around that and to make change happen. So I realized that was an extremely long answer to your very, very direct question, but
you did it in a New York minute. So
just like that.
It works itself out.
Yeah. And but that's really, look, there are all these terms that are bandied about, like mansplaining and this and that. One of my closest friends from my days with the Niners is Eric Reid, the great safety who played for the Niners, spent some time with the Panthers. I love Eric. And Eric said to me a couple years ago.
Eric is raw. I mean, and I respect him for that. He makes no bones about the kind of person he is and what he wants to say. He's unfiltered, but you have to respect that, because anybody who, you 2 inches to the right, 2 inches to the left, people think that, you don't stand for anything. And Eric has always been consistent about where he stands, especially with the circumstances regarding Colin Kaepernick. And not to take us off track, but I can completely understand where you're coming from to have spent time with an individual like him, because guys like that, I do respect that they stay true to themselves.
Eric and I could talk to him for hours and I leave feeling like my brain has grown multiple sizes, because he is so brilliant. But he said something to me a couple years ago that is really the reason why I decided to launch my own agency around philanthropic impact and amplifying athletes' voices. I was sharing something with him about an initiative I was launching and how I was being held back on it. And somebody had said to me that it sounded like it was too complicated. And I, in a very New York way, said, who are they to tell me what's too complicated? Like, nothing's too complicated. And he looked at me and he goes, yeah, no, you don't let people say that to you, because it isn't too complicated to you or for you. It's too complicated for them to think through the steps, and they'd rather just avoid it as opposed to allowing you to approach it in the systematic way that you will. And this was over, a brunch, and we talked about it, and that stuck with me. So, my trigger word is complicated. That sounds complicated. I just think that means you're too lazy to get it done, because there's a way to break it down. And, for Eric, he would say that his trigger word was articulate. Somebody would say, you're really articulate. And he'd say, and that means ... for a fill in the blank word. And for me, I looked at it as like, is that too complicated for a woman, for a girl with red hair and freckles, for somebody who's short, who grew up, whatever, who's a mom? Like, what is it about me that makes you think that I can't complete this task?
The Mad Lib.
Mad Lib. Yeah, exactly. Don't put me in a box. But
I would hate to play against you and Eric, man. You guys would just slay that game. I was so frustrated. I'll quit after the first round. My goodness.
Well, you don't want to play chess against Eric ever. So, but it's, this is the thing, is that there's such, when I see people who underestimate intellectual capacity or ability to influence because of the vocabulary you're using or the accent you might have, it builds up inside of me in a way where I'm like, can you just listen to their voice without judging the way that it sounds? That's part of what we were trying to control for within this program, was if we empower you with a playbook, and that's what they'll come out of this program with, we empower you with a playbook and the resources to be able to go out and speak with confidence and authority on the topics that are of greatest importance to you personally, then how much better will you feel when that microphone is in your face? You won't have to say words that you think you're supposed to use, but you can actually speak from a place that is really deep down what you're believing and what you're feeling at that moment. But having having a little bit of academic background, having some context for why something's happening, just enables a degree of confidence to back that up, so that you aren't backing away from the microphone, but leaning into it and saying, okay, I'm ready. I'll talk about this.
I gotta say, excuse me, you're inspiring, really and truly, I feel like almost like I'm in church right now. and so many things I want to ask about.
Days for me, but we'll do what we can.
I always think about, and you kind of touched on this here a little bit too, like, nobody's any one thing. And I think athletes have a multitude of interests. And when you get them to speak on something, a lot of times when I've been around athletes at, different team events, you can tell they don't give a damn. That's all right. I'm here because they told me to be here and things of that nature. And when you really get to the crux of what they're interested in, then it gets, you get their authentic voice really and truly. I got to ask in some ways, because I pretty much kind of know the answer already, I guess, in some ways, but is there even like a wish list for you all? Or is there a group or a person or athletes that you're like, we really would like to get them involved in what Athletes Voices is doing?
That's a great question. I really want to have as much cross-representation as possible so that we have different voices at the table. Ibtihaj Muhammad was on my wish list for sure. She is, I don't even know how to describe how awesome she is as a woman. As an advocate, as an athlete, she is, she competes in fencing. She is an Olympic medalist. She's a proud Black woman. She competes with a hijab. She is unapologetically her, and she is so whip smart, brilliant. Like, when I'm on a call with her, I'm like, I got to come in prepared. Like, I got to know what I'm going to talk about. I also had a bit of a fangirl moment because my daughter, who just turned 13, is training for pentathlon and is a fencer. And my daughter has her book by her bedside. But she was on my wish list because of how she represents herself and how empowering I believe she is for not just young women, but for young men as well, who just are saying, like, don't tell me what I can and can't do. But also Alana Nichols, who is the first woman to medal in both the Winter and Summer Games. She was an elite athlete for her whole life, had a spinal injury, and is now in a wheelchair. But she is an advocate on ableism, but she just finished her term as president of the Women's Sports Foundation, and she competes in wheelchair basketball as well as alpine skiing. So Paralympics, Summer, Winter Games. And she's a mom to a kid whose initials spell out GOAT. So I don't know if your kid is the GOAT and he's won, like, you've got my vote. But I mean, that's what we want. We want a little bit of everything. I mean, having Coach Kerr, having David West, Anquan Boldin, Torrey Smith, like names that anybody who follows sports is going to recognize is tremendous. And we'll have a few more athletes joining us over the coming weeks, where you're gonna be like, okay, yeah, those are some names. But it's more about their passion for the cause and their ability to be mentors and to speak up and speak out about the journeys that brings them to the program, and the authenticity to lean in and do something about it.
Joanne Pasternack joining us here on the baseline. She is the co-faunder, and I mean, you yourself might even be a legend. I mean, in already. But the platform is called Athletes Voices, and for those who are interested in in viewing and watching some of the clips that they've amassed already from some of the webcasts that they have featured, we encourage you to go through Instagram or Twitter. Go to Athletes Vox, AthletesVox. I mean, there's so much that we want to get into. So the first thing I do want to highlight, and it's obviously the reason why we brought you on here, so that you can continue to talk about Athletes' Voices. One of the more remarkable things that I had already seen is the very first webcast that your platform was able to provide was the Origins of Change. And it featured Paul Gasol, Torrey Smith, Carol Stern, Donald E. Lasserre, Sven Beckert, and it got multiple views, and it just obviously was the springboard for you to even continue to do the things. Talk about the effort in what it took to put together the Orange of Change, what that experience was like to be surrounded by these athletes all under this particular common cause, and how did that help move the ball forward for Athletes' Voices to continue to do what it's doing now?
You know, when you start on your journey through your life and your career, you meet a lot of people along the way. And I tend to be a collector of people. If I find somebody and they really inspire me in some way, I want to keep them around. I think that panel is an example of that. Carol Stern is somebody who's been an amazing mentor to me for many, many years. She was the president and chief executive officer of UNICEF USA prior to going to the Walton Family Foundation. She's somebody I've called at random hours of the night to get lifted up again when I'm feeling down, when I'm feeling stalled in a career point, or even for personal things. But I knew that she would do a terrific job in moderating the conversation. When you think about athletes who have stood up and have really overcome obstacles, Torrey Smith, I mean, there's just
he's been on CNN and in various news platforms, and I'm just blown away with the way that he really lays out a point of view about a particular issue and him Eaton Thomas, excuse me, who is aligned with one of our colleagues, Alex Kennedy, in Basketball News, Dante Stallworth. There's this, I mean, it's just remarkable, but I especially was blown away by Torrey Smith and how he continues to, just kind of like really show people like, hey man, it's not just what I was doing on the football field that matters, man. Like he's like, I was making things happen behind it as well too, which is balancing itself out,
Well, and it's interesting because the behind the scenes people don't know about that's happening on the league level is so when I was embedded at the 49ers, and we had this great network of the 32 community relations or foundation heads, one for each of the teams. We're a very close group. We would meet up once a year at the combine and sit down and have a couple days of meetings and information share. And while we're competitors on the field, certainly off the field, we were collaborators. And that is when Torrey was coming over to the 49ers from the Baltimore Ravens. I got a text from my colleague at the Ravens, Heather, and she said, "Oh man, you will be astounded by this guy. Like, just can't wait." And it went full circle because I was on a call just yesterday with Torrey and with Heather again about a project that we're collaborating on in Baltimore. And we laughed because she said, "Remember when I sent you that text, Joanne? Wasn't I right?" And I was like, beyond, but bringing together this group, it really was about how are we going to create a context for the conversations to come. And that's where Donald from the Muhammad Ali Center came in. If you haven't visited the Ali Center in Louisville, as soon as all this craziness of sheltering in place is over, like just hightail it there. You got to go there. I took my son, Reid, when he was in second grade, and he was doing a state report on Kentucky, of all things. He chose to do Kentucky. And I had met Donald at the ESPYs. We sat next to each other at a dinner, and I had no idea where he worked, but I just knew that he had a great spirit. We started talking, and he ended up arranging for a visit to the Muhammad Ali Center, and it is an immersive museum experience. My son, who at the time, as I said, was in second grade, he was 9 years old, and he wanted to spend 4 hours, 5 hours there. I could not get him out of the center because he was drinking in history. And there was a moment there where he was asked to reflect on when Muhammad Ali had his bike stolen as a youngster, when Cassius Clay had his bike stolen. And Reid had just gotten a new bike, and he had a red bike. And this moment, it was the red bike. And Reid was asked to reflect on it. And when I told him that Donald was going to be on this program, and this is, my son's now in fifth grade, he goes, "Oh, Mom, remember that exhibit?" And he starts to talk about these things. And that's history coming to life. And for a kid who has grown up in Northern California and who wouldn't otherwise have a reason to know about the life and the origins of Muhammad Ali, to be able to contextualize it because of somebody who's such a terrific storyteller like Donald, and to know that there are centers like the Ali Center, to be able to bring that back to life, really was why we began with the history of. And each of these webcasts, we will reflect back on the history of whatever the topic is. We are in the Weatherhead Center, which is focused on history. But I think reflecting on my own family history and the fact that actually, it's my great aunt, my Aunt Joyce's birthday today. She is an amazing human. She's part of my heart. She's also a docent at the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. And one of the things that I've learned since my earliest days was if you don't learn from history, you're destined to repeat it. And that's the central message at the Holocaust Museum. And that's one of the central messages here is we are based and steeped in history. Why are we here? What have we learned? If we forget what we've learned, will we do it again? And we are looking at that next generation of athletes to rise up and carry on the great work that was started. And so we are addressing the voices of all different athletes. So one thing you'll notice if you were to go on our website at athletesvoices.org and you look at the webinars that are scheduled for the next 8-9 months, we don't call out specific subgroups or identifying characteristics. There's no LGBTQ awareness day or women's history day, because to me, those voices should be included in every conversation we're having. So instead of looking at it as let's focus on that during that month, we're just embedding that in all of them. So every single one of these panels, including the origins of change, you will hear from people who can speak to their own experiences, but aren't being pigeonholed because they happen to be affiliated with one particular group. So that was important to us as well. And I'm optimistic that we can succeed. We did a good job with the first one. The second one, obviously super timely, hosted around voter suppression and case study looking at Central Florida. Pretty excited to have Anquan Boldin, another terrific NFL voice for change, co-leader of the Players Coalition, somebody who absolutely speaks up. I always joke with Anquan, he's a man of few words, but those he speaks are powerful. Midge Purse, may not have heard Midge Purse's name before, but you certainly will hear it in the future. She's a Harvard 2017 graduate who played on the women's soccer team there. She's also one of the youngest people to ever be voted onto the Harvard Board of Overseers. She grew up same town I did, Silver Spring, Maryland. But she, young Black woman who is just getting it done. She launched an initiative called the Black Players Collective, which worked on getting 100% of the athletes in the world of professional soccer to register to vote, and they succeeded.
Does it take you back a little bit, Joanne Shaw? I know you got a question, but I just want to follow up on this point because I don't want to lose it. Does it surprise you the number of professional athletes who are now finding out that had not positioned themselves to be eligible to vote? It's almost, it's weird because it's not to say anything bad about them. I think part of it is just like kind of like the non-prioritization, like as far as in our basic democratic process, and that there isn't resources available in their, as they're coming up, from primary school, middle school, high school, whatever, to emphasize, say, hey, this is part of, you as a person is the ability to vote and stuff. I just find it remarkable that there's that many initiatives and going on right now to make sure that the athletes themselves are eligible and to be able to vote in the democratic process.
Well, it's about that role modeling again. And, I've thought about it a lot, having, kids who are too young to vote, but who are very interested in the political process and in what's happening in our country right now. And it's particularly with the loss of Ruth Bader Ginsburg recently, that hit my daughter pretty hard. And one of the things I said to her was, think about, we talked about the hashtag Be Like Ruth, like, what does that mean? What does it mean? It means that you can exercise your right to vote. You can use your voice. This is a democratic process. So go do it. Like, don't sit down and say, I'm going to let somebody else do it. I try to analogize it as much as I can to other things that feel tangible. But it does come down to, like, if you walk past a piece of trash lying on the ground and you don't stop and pick it up, then you're leaving it for somebody else to pick up. And who knows how much trash we'll eventually collect. And, Yeah, I went to the University of Pennsylvania for college. I was able to learn from some of the great scholars around broken windows theory and, just the way that urban development happens. My mom grew up in West Philadelphia, um, and that's really where a lot of those thoughts around, like, if you don't fix the broken window, then the rest of the and you fix the whole building, the rest of the windows, eventually it goes back to what it was. And we know that so much of urban development was predicated upon the idea that if you put people in a community together, then they're isolated from the rest of the community that's already in development. But going back to that mindset does not allow us to share our thoughts. And that's what Athletes' Voices is supposed to be. Open conversation. We have the academics. We have somebody like Donald, who speaks from a place of historic context, but also practical knowledge. But then you have the athletes who are living it day in, day out. And with the Vote, Get Out the Vote webinar, having Desmond Meade, who is a formerly incarcerated individual who, when he emerged, wanted to exercise his right to vote and discovered that he was ineligible in the state of Florida, even though he was a returning citizen. And he was like, what's up with that? Like, I have a voice and I've done my time. So what about me? And instead of sitting around and saying like, oh, that's too bad, I guess I don't vote, he got up and like, oh, I'll just mobilize people. And he did. And then he passed legislation. I mean, he got the vote. And then Florida comes in and passes new legislation to say, oh, but sorry, if you have a fine, we're not going to let you vote. And he didn't give up then. And that's what being an athlete's about as well. So I was a competitive figure skater growing up. And I joke with the guys I work with. I'm like, I've had all the injuries you've had. I just had them on a smaller scale because I'm like 5'3 3/4" and wear a size 7 shoe. But that being said, I've broken arms. But what I know about athletes is we get knocked down and we're like, all right, bring it on. Like, bring it on again. Like, I might not be running into an offensive lineman, but ice is pretty darn hard and cold, and you just keep getting back up. And so why would we want to quiet the voices of those who run into things and keep getting back up? Because Desmond Meade is one of my heroes. Because when people told him that his voice didn't count, he said, no, I don't believe you. And then when they still tried to tell him it didn't count, he said, not going to listen again. And now here we are, and he's somehow been able to mobilize to action and pay off the fines of 1.2 million people in Florida to make them eligible. And if he's done that, then hopefully people, even if they don't think their vote counts, at least they can go and give him the respect of actually filling out the ballot, right?
I think that's a great point, Joanne. And I guess I kind of want to ask next, with the webinars that are scheduled, I mean, obviously a lot of work goes into figuring out what you want to do next, so to speak. Mm-hmm. But I guess my question is, in sports and in working in this business, anything can happen and things can change and not on a dime. What type of wiggle room do you think the organization has to maybe change a webinar or just to be able to create something in addition that may need to be responsive to what's happening in society at that given time?
Well, I can tell you from the mindset of an athlete, we are always ready to pivot when we need to. My sport in particular, if you had a required element and you fell on your butt in the first minute, you better figure out a way to get it in there before the music ended. And so even if it meant throwing a double toe loop onto the end of a double axel at the
there you go.
mark, you're going to do it, right? So same thing, like if you ask any athlete, what does it look like when you're at the fourth down? And what you had thought you were going to do isn't going to come to fruition, you just pivot. So I love when people in the corporate world will say things like, oh, we're pivoting our mindset around how we're going to operate our business. I'm like, going on to a Zoom call is not a true pivot. Like that's adorable, but it's not a pivot. Like, we are ready, we are willing, we are able to jump in and do this. The folks we've brought on board are get it done people. I like to surround myself with get it done people. You don't have to be a get it done person, but we ride a lot better together when you are. And we have, my strategist group, they are all volunteering their time to be a part of this initiative. And I mean, Kelsey Wharton from the Obama Foundation, Aaron Golightly from the Smithsonian's, Matt DeNacera from the Utah Jazz, like these people. And then I have to give a shout out to Sophia Rue. She's a sophomore at Harvard. She's leading our initiative to bring 50 undergraduates from the university and from Simmons College together to be fellows for the athletes, to bring them through this journey for the next year, once we've identified the athletes who will be enrolling in the program in June. And Sophia Robb and her buddies are going to make sure that these folks all continue to go through the lessons within their playbook. And she's 19 years old. Yeah. So let's honor like Sophia's commitment as well and just kind of keep it going. So that's where we're at. There's a lot. It's fun. Super fun.
Wow. Co-founder, strategy officer, I don't know.
Super mom.
Thank you.
Competitive ice skater, just an all-around phenomenal individual who is spearheading really one of the best platforms right now that is allowing athletes to speak freely and speak boldly. Athletes' Voices. And again, please go to www.athletesvoices.org. Joanne, I have no words for, what you've laid out for us, which is really very much motivational. I think the only other question I have now is, so when are the Athletes' Voices podcasts happening, and when will the Baseline Boys have a chance to get in on that initiative? Because we will be absolutely honored and privileged and totally geeked out to sit down with great minds such as yourself to help amplify the voices that you guys are just totally putting out on full scale. It's just absolutely phenomenal. So you let us know when that goes down.
I will. And you know what? It's funny because Torrey Smith is one of our athlete advisors. He brought this up just a couple of weeks ago. He said, we should roll something out that is giving athletes a chance to just spend 10 minutes using their own voice, talking about what it is that's deep within them, and doing that in a short form kind of format. And so there's more to come. The other thing I know is that we have some materials that we'll be rolling out that are appropriate for the younger members of our audience too. David West and I met when we were both at the Warriors, when I was the head of philanthropy over at the Golden State Warriors. And we met because our daughters are the same age. And both of us were really unhappy with the curriculum for U.S. history. I mean, this is what you talk about in your free time when you're not at practice, apparently. But we didn't like the way U.S. history was being taught. And so David, being David, said, what? I think
David, definitely. David is from Teaneck, New Jersey. I'm just up the street. I'm in Fort Lee right now.
Yeah. I have family in Hackensack, but we're good.
There you go.
Yeah. But David said, again, this is a guy who doesn't just sit around waiting for things to happen. He's like, I think we should look into rewriting those history books, that they better reflect the Black American experience. And so David's enrolled in a master's degree program right now. He's part of our leadership team, but we're also looking at what can we do to reach out to the younger generation. And when Colin Kaepernick's journey first became a global news story, we were playing, the 49ers were playing the Atlanta Falcons. I went to the newly opened Civil Rights Museum, and I walked into their bookstore and I said, do you have a book that I can bring home to help my kids to understand a little bit better what's going on right now in the world? And they had nothing that was appropriate. And I see so many different opportunities coming from this, where we can begin to speak to different voices in different languages that make it digestible. So we're going to have a lot of fun, and I would love to bring people back to talk to you, to share more about this. I hope lots of people sign on to our upcoming podcasts, or webcasts, excuse me. We have the next one coming up. We'll be looking at policing, incarceration, and bias. We're going to be exploring that subject in a pretty intense way, but I'm actually very keyed in on our December topic, which is around mental health and wellness and just taking care of ourselves. This has been a tough year for everybody. Yeah. And as we get to December, it has to be top of mind. And for some of us, our best outlet is through physical fitness and sports, but for others, that's not where it's at, particularly around the holidays. And so I'm looking forward to these topics, and we welcome people to write in and let us know if there are some areas they'd like to hear. And all of our webinars are free, totally free. We are broadcasting them via Facebook Live, also at Sports on Facebook. So they are being live streamed there. And we are keeping them up for no determined amount of time. So you can visit our website and see them if you missed them when they are live. And we're going to be continuing to broadcast that out. And also, if you go over to my website, oliverrosellc.com, or go over to athletesvoices.org, we have some book lists and some other things that you can use to provide more context for these conversations, and certainly featuring a lot of the Harvard academics who are part of the program and some of the books that they've written as well. So that's it.
Great resources, Joanne. And before I let you go, I think, there's a lot of synergy. I mean, we worked with Ricky Vellante, who was working with David West on, the PCL League and things of that nature. So, I mean, just seem to be kind of swimming in the same direction. And we want to be advocates and supporters of everything you do. But there's something that you said that I feel like remiss if I didn't get our fans and listeners an opportunity to hear from you in this aspect. You were working with 49ers, you said, when the whole Kaepernick situation was going down. Talk a little bit about what it's like to be in the organization and kind of divisiveness that was even happening outside of the organization. And, you're trying to represent a player and a team at the same time with everything that you're doing. Just what was that like as, a member of that organization working in that space?
When you work for a small family-run business that puts on really big shows, you are given a gift of a platform that you can amplify, or you can sit down and just be quiet and let things happen around you. I feel so fortunate that I was given a chance to speak up and speak out. And it was right in the middle of that I took that journey to Rome. And that was through the generosity of the ownership group and the leadership who sponsored my journey out there, and were always agents for change and to support me and my personal journey. But I went over to the Warriors right in the middle of all of that, actually April of that year, knowing that that the NBA was on the forefront of really taking a stance and doing the right thing. And when we won the NBA championship, and we were not invited to the White House, but sort of invited. And I saw how Coach Kerr led the team through that moment, and not only the team, but the front office as well. I knew that I was in front of one of the greatest leaders I'd ever encountered. And the journey, I mean, I'll follow Coach Kerr wherever he goes, because he led with dignity and with humility, but he honored the athletes' voices first and foremost, and didn't have the organization speaking on behalf of the individual. And the trip we made to DC, so we played the Wizards. We played in Philadelphia the night before, but we played the Wizards, and while we were there, we had an opportunity to go into the African American History Museum, and we had kids from Seat Pleasant, Maryland, the community where Kevin Durant and Quinn Cook grew up, and nobody told the players, this is how this is going to go. It was orchestrated, ideated, everything by the players. There were 2 staff members there, me and my colleague who oversaw youth basketball, great guy, but it was just the 2 of us. And that's how the players wanted it. And that's what we did. Oh, and my Aunt Joyce, who came across the street, she's dosing over at the museum, and I was like, "Help me manage a lot."
Joyce has to come
Happy birthday, Aunt
Joyce. Aunt Joyce. Always Aunt Joyce.
Cannot She would be so mad. You come up in DC and not look for her. Wow.
No, I needed her. I put 1 inches of Brooklyn feist, and I needed her by my side because I had 150 kids I had to manage, plus a whole basketball team. So you put the two of us together, and nobody's getting by anything, and we got it done. But it was watching that I know that when you, but there's an expression, with great. You have great opportunity. You need to take advantage of it. I'm going to mangle the expression, so I'm not even going to try to put it out there right now. But that's how I look at it, and I believe that I was given that opportunity at the Niners. That was further amplified being at a place like the Golden State Warriors, and now being a part of Athletes' Voices, and being surrounded by such greatness here. I don't even know where it's going to go, but I'm excited to be a part of it. And I often think about this, when you mentioned the mom part. I am a mom. I'm a daughter. I'm a mom. I had the greatest father one could have hoped for. My father's voice has been silenced because of Alzheimer's and younger onset Alzheimer's. He had so much that he was capable of and that he taught me. He's only 72. He doesn't know who I am. He doesn't know who he is. But I know what he started, and I also know that the world isn't quite what my daughter and son believe it to be just yet. And I remember that moment when I realized that my dad was working really hard to create something so that the world would be better for me. And I just want it to be that, for our kids, because I think you guys are probably younger than me, but we're all around the same age. And I don't want to let them down. And that's what I see in these athletes I work with, is they have that fire. And so I'd say that if we put the future of the world in the hands of athletes and driven individuals who get knocked down and get back up again, then we're going to be in pretty good shape. Let's just let them speak with their authentic voices and not try to squash it down or tell them that they need to use proper grammar or whatever it is, or filter their voice. Like, just be you and go out and be great. And we're just going to follow along.
Joanne, this has been a phenomenal conversation. I usually, whenever we do, our interviews and stuff, I usually try and do, the follow-up plugs and things of that nature. But just what you said right there is exactly how a great interview should end, because it leaves a lasting impression for people to understand why we even are having this conversation. And so I'm totally floored. Throughout the show, Sean and I will be completely plugging in, the website and all of the different platforms in which to get access to Athletes' Voices. But man, this has been a remarkable conversation, insightful in so many different ways. So I have to say, kudos to our girl Alicia, kudos to you, Shaw. But man, thank you so much. This has been awesome.
Well, and if you can't have a platform to share your voice, it's kind of like a tree in the forest, right? You got to be exactly. Out. So thank you guys for having this great platform. Thank you for your professionalism, for doing your research, and for inviting me to be a part of this. I can't wait to share it with others as well, and to come back with some of the great voices that are representing our program as well.